The engine noise died suddenly. 300 passengers fell silent as the pilot emerged, his voice cold through the speakers. "This flight will not take off until you return that woman to her first-class seat. Right now." No one knew the black woman just removed to economy controlled this airline's future. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up for what's right, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories of courage and justice. Now, let's uncover what happened on this unforgettable flight. 6 hours earlier, Nadine Washington stood in her corner office on the 30th floor of TechVista Solutions headquarters in San Francisco. At 47, she had built a $2 billion AI software empire from absolutely nothing. Today marked the culmination of 12 years of relentless work. She was flying to New York to finalize a $500 million acquisition that would cement her company's dominance in the industry. Nadine checked her reflection one final time. Her gray Armani suit fit perfectly, tailored to convey exactly what she was: powerful, successful, in control. Her cornrows were woven into an elegant pattern that took 3 hours to complete. Cartier glasses perched on her nose. The Patek Philippe watch on her wrist cost more than most people's cars. Her Hermès bag contained not just her laptop, but confidential documents that would reshape the tech industry. Forbes had named her CEO of the Year just 2 weeks ago. The magazine sat on her desk, her face on the cover with the headline, "Breaking Barriers: How Nadine Washington Built an Empire." She allowed herself a small smile. That scared girl from a tiny Alabama town had come impossibly far. Her assistant knocked. "Your car is ready, Ms. Washington. You have plenty of time to make your flight." At San Francisco International Airport, the first-class check-in counter processed her ticket smoothly. The agent smiled professionally, wished her a pleasant flight, handed over her boarding pass. No issues. No problems. Nadine moved through security with the ease of someone who traveled every single week. The TSA officer barely glanced at her credentials before waving her through. The first-class lounge welcomed her with champagne she declined. She had work to finish. Nadine opened her laptop, reviewing the final presentation one more time. Every number had to be perfect. Every projection had to be airtight. The board of directors would scrutinize every detail. A white businessman in his 60s settled into the chair beside her, despite numerous empty seats throughout the lounge. Gerald Foster. His name tag identified him as attending the same business conference in New York. He glanced at Nadine with barely concealed curiosity. "What do you do?" Gerald asked, his tone suggesting he expected her to say flight attendant or maybe administrative assistant. "Technology," Nadine replied simply, not looking up from her screen. Gerald nodded, his interest evaporating. He pulled out his phone, speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Yeah, I'm in the lounge now. It's getting crowded with these people. They're everywhere these days, even in first class. I remember when you knew everyone here was, serious business." Nadine's fingers paused over her keyboard. She knew exactly what "these people" meant. She had heard variations of this her entire career. She took a slow breath and continued working. "Pick your battles," she reminded herself. "Save your energy for fights that matter." Boarding began on time. Nadine walked down the jetway, her heels clicking confidently. She had earned this first-class seat. She had earned every single thing she had. The aircraft gleamed. Nadine found seat 2A, her preferred spot, window side in the first row. She stowed her bag carefully, settled into the plush leather, and opened her laptop again. Around her, other first-class passengers took their seats. Businessmen in expensive suits. A few couples clearly flying for vacation. Everyone looked comfortable, like they belonged. A flight attendant approached. Patricia Reynolds, according to her name tag. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes landed on Nadine and something shifted in her expression. Surprise. Confusion. Suspicion. Can I help you find your seat? Patricia asked, her tone suggesting Nadine must be lost. I'm in my seat. 2A. Nadine gestured to the seat number above her head. Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. May I see your boarding pass? Nadine handed it over, a tiny alarm bell ringing in her mind. She had flown hundreds of times. No one ever asked to see her boarding pass after she had already boarded and sat down. Patricia examined it far longer than necessary, turning it over as if searching for evidence of fraud. She called over another flight attendant, a man in his late 20s named Brandon Miller. They huddled together, whispering while glancing repeatedly at Nadine. Other passengers began to notice. Gerald Foster, seated in 3C, watched with obvious interest. Brandon stepped forward, his voice carrying through the cabin. Ma'am, we believe there might be some confusion about your seat assignment. Nadine felt her stomach tighten. Here we go, she thought. Here we go again. Nadine kept her voice level, professional. There's no confusion. I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago. Seat 2A. First class. I have my boarding pass, my credit card statement, and my confirmation email if you need to see them. Patricia exchanged a meaningful look with Brandon. We've had reports of fraudulent tickets recently. We need to verify everything is legitimate. Reports from whom? Nadine asked. I checked in at your counter 90 minutes ago. Everything was fine then. What changed? Brandon shifted his weight. We just need to be thorough. And honestly, ma'am, your appearance doesn't really match our typical first-class clientele. The words hung in the air like poison. Nadine felt heat rising in her chest. My appearance? I'm wearing a $3,000 suit. What exactly about my appearance concerns you? Patricia jumped in quickly. We're not saying anything like that. We just need to follow protocol. For everyone's safety and comfort. Whose comfort? Nadine's voice rose slightly. She forced it back down. Getting angry would only confirm their biases. I am the CEO of TechVista Solutions. I fly first class every single week. I have platinum status with this airline. This is discrimination, plain and simple. A white woman across the aisle, Diane Campbell, whispered loudly to her husband. I don't know where she got that ticket, but they should check carefully. You can't be too careful these days. Nadine's hands clenched. 12 years of building a company. 12 years of proving herself over and over. And here, 30,000 feet below where she would soon fly, she was being treated like a criminal. Patricia signaled toward the front of the plane. I'm calling the head flight attendant. She'll sort this out. Charlotte Evans emerged from the galley. 50 years old, steel gray hair, and eyes that assessed Nadine in one cold sweep. She listened to Patricia's explanation, nodding slowly. Ma'am, I apologize for the inconvenience, but we need to ask you to move to another seat while we verify your ticket information. Charlotte's tone allowed no argument. I'm not moving. This is my seat. I paid $7,000 for this ticket. If you have a problem with my presence here, call airport security. Call the police. But I will not be removed from the seat I purchased because of your prejudice. Charlotte's expression hardened. Ma'am, if you refuse to cooperate, I'll have no choice but to remove you from this aircraft entirely for disrupting operations and refusing to follow crew instructions. Other passengers began voicing their opinions. Gerald Foster spoke up. We're already delayed. If there's an issue with her ticket, she should just move so we can get going. A businessman in row 4 nodded. Exactly. The rest of us have places to be. Nadine looked around the cabin. Not one person met her eyes. Not one person spoke in her defense. She was alone in a sea of judgment and indifference. Her phone was in her hand. She started recording. I'm documenting this. I'm being removed from first class for no legitimate reason other than the color of my skin. Patricia reached for the phone. You cannot record on this aircraft. It's against regulations. It's absolutely not against regulations, Nadine shot back. But intimidating passengers is. Brandon stepped closer, his body language aggressive. Another male flight attendant appeared, flanking Nadine's other side. Charlotte crossed her arms. Ma'am, you have two choices. Move to economy voluntarily, or we will escort you off this plane and you won't fly at all today. Choose now. Nadine felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. But she also could not miss this meeting. Her entire company's future depended on it. Fine, she said quietly. I'll move. But I'm filing a formal complaint. I'm contacting my attorney. And you haven't heard the last of this. Charlotte smiled thinly. Of course, ma'am. You can file whatever you want after we land. Now please gather your belongings. Brandon and the other attendant stood close as Nadine pulled her laptop and bag from under the seat. Her hands shook with rage. Patricia grabbed Nadine's carry-on from the overhead bin, handling it roughly. They walked her down the aisle like she was a criminal being perp-walked. Every eye in first class watched. Some looked away uncomfortably. Most watched with curiosity or approval. Gerald Foster had actually gone back to reading his magazine, completely unconcerned. Nadine walked past row after row, her head held high despite the humiliation burning through her veins. This was not how CEOs were treated. This was not how human beings should be treated. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was exactly how black people were still treated, no matter how successful they became. Seat 27B sat wedged between a teenager with headphones and a young black man in a hoodie. The space was cramped, the air stale. Nadine's knees pressed against the seat in front of her. There was no power outlet for her laptop. No room to spread out her documents. She tried to shove her Hermes bag under the seat. It barely fit. The luxury item looked absurd here, like she was pretending to be someone she was not. Except she was not pretending. She was exactly who she claimed to be. The world just refused to believe it. The young man beside her watched her struggle with sympathetic eyes. They did that to you? Kicked you out of first class? Nadine nodded, not trusting her voice yet. I'm Jamal Hughes, he said quietly. I'm sorry that happened. I know exactly how it feels. Nadine finally looked at him. He was maybe 25, with kind eyes and an engineering textbook poking out of his backpack. Thank you, she managed. She pulled out her phone before the flight attendants could demand all electronics be stowed. Her fingers flew across the screen. Rita Thompson, her attorney, answered on the first ring. Rita, I need you to document something. I was just removed from my first-class seat on Flight 447 to New York because the staff claimed I looked suspicious. I'm sitting in economy now. I need this on record immediately. Rita's voice sharpened with anger. Did they give any legitimate reason? No. They claimed they needed to verify my ticket, but we both know what this was really about. I want to file suit. And I want it loud. I'll start the paperwork now. Are you safe? Do you need me to contact the airline? I'm fine. Just angry. I'll call you when we land. Nadine ended the call and closed her eyes. 12 years of fighting. 12 years of being the only black woman in boardrooms full of white men. 12 years of being questioned, doubted, dismissed. She thought she had climbed high enough to escape this. She was wrong. An older white woman leaned forward from the row behind. Eleanor Price, her voice gentle. I saw what they did to you. That was terrible. Absolutely terrible. If you need a witness for anything, I'll testify. Nadine turned, surprised. You would do that? Of course. I'm 78 years old. I've seen too much injustice in my life to stay silent anymore. Eleanor's eyes were fierce despite her age. Thank you, Nadine said, meaning it deeply. That means more than you know. Jamal spoke up again. Last year, they pulled me off a plane because someone said I looked threatening. I was wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack. I'm a software engineer. I was going home to see my sick mother. But to them, I was just another suspicious black man. Nadine recognized the pain in his voice. It mirrored her own. How did you handle it? I didn't. I just accepted it, got on the next flight, and tried to forget. But it eats at you, doesn't it? Every single time you have to prove you belong somewhere. Every single time, Nadine agreed. She thought about all the venture capitalists who had refused to meet with her because they could not imagine a black woman running a tech company. The investors who assumed she was the secretary when she walked into pitch meetings. The competitors who whispered that she must have slept her way to success. She had overcome all of it through sheer determination and undeniable results. But here, on this airplane, none of that mattered. She was just another black woman who did not belong in first class. The announcement crackled through the cabin. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. The plane began pushing back from the gate. Nadine fastened her seatbelt, trying to focus on her presentation. But the words blurred on her screen. Her hands were still shaking. They taxied toward the runway. Nadine stared out the window at the gray tarmac, the distant hills, the life she had built in San Francisco. In 5 hours, she would land in New York and walk into the most important meeting of her career. She needed to be sharp, focused, powerful. Instead, she felt small and humiliated. The plane turned onto the runway. The engines powered up, that familiar whine building toward takeoff. But then, suddenly, everything stopped. The engines wound down. The plane jerked to a halt. Confused murmurs rippled through the cabin. Nadine looked up from her laptop. What was happening? The cockpit door opened. A tall black man in a crisp pilot's uniform stepped out. Captain Aaron Bennett. His face was set in hard lines, his jaw tight. He picked up the intercom handset. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a serious situation that must be addressed before this aircraft can depart. 300 passengers held their breath. Aaron's eyes scanned the cabin until they found Charlotte Evans. I need to speak with the head flight attendant immediately. This flight is grounded until we resolve a problem. Nadine's heart began to pound. What was this? What was happening? 15 minutes earlier, in the cockpit, First Officer Christopher Lane had mentioned the commotion in first class. Some passenger got moved to economy. I think there was an issue with her ticket or something. Aaron Bennett had been running through his pre-flight checklist, but something in Christopher's casual tone made him pause. What passenger? I don't know. Some black woman. Patricia and Charlotte handled it. Aaron's hands stilled on the controls. They moved a passenger from first class to economy. On what grounds? Christopher shrugged. Like I said, ticket issue, I think. Why? Because Aaron had lived this. 5 years ago, he had stood at a gate in his pilot uniform, and a passenger had looked at him and said, "You're the pilot." Really? The disbelief in that woman's voice still stung. Last year, security had stopped him in the airport, demanding to see his credentials because someone reported a suspicious man in a pilot costume. He knew exactly what ticket issue meant when applied to a black passenger. Aaron called the flight attendant station. Charlotte answered. Yes, Captain. Tell me exactly what happened with the passenger you moved. Charlotte's voice was defensive. We had concerns about the validity of her ticket. We handled it appropriately. Her name. A pause. Nadine Washington. Aaron felt his blood run cold. Nadine Washington. CEO of TechVista Solutions. The woman whose company was negotiating a $500 million contract with this very airline to provide AI automation systems. The woman whose face had been on the cover of Forbes 2 weeks ago. He pulled up the passenger manifest on his tablet. There it was. Nadine Washington, Seat 2A, first-class ticket purchased 3 weeks ago, Platinum frequent flyer member, no flags, no issues, nothing irregular whatsoever. What exactly made you question her ticket? Aaron asked, his voice dangerously calm. Charlotte hesitated. She didn't seem like she belonged in first class. And when we asked to verify, she became difficult. Difficult how? Argumentative. Refused to cooperate with crew instructions. Aaron closed his eyes. He had heard this script before. He had lived this script before. Charlotte, did this passenger do anything actually wrong? Did she threaten anyone? Was she intoxicated? Did she violate any actual regulation? Silence. Did you move her because she's black? Aaron asked bluntly. Captain, I resent that implication. We were following protocol. What protocol allows you to remove a passenger from a legitimately purchased seat with no cause? Aaron's voice rose. You racially profiled her. You humiliated her. And you did it on my aircraft. Sir, with all due respect, cabin management is my responsibility. And this entire aircraft is mine. I'm grounding this flight. Christopher looked at him in shock. Aaron, what are you doing? Fixing a mistake. Aaron unbuckled his harness and stood. You can't ground a flight over a seating dispute. Watch me. Aaron walked out of the cockpit, his tall frame commanding immediate attention. He picked up the passenger address system microphone. His voice filled the cabin with quiet authority. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Aaron Bennett. I apologize for the delay, but we have a serious matter that must be resolved before we can depart. A passenger on this aircraft was removed from her seat and relocated without just cause. This is unacceptable. We will not be taking off until this situation is corrected. Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the cabin. Gerald Foster called out, Captain, we're already late. Whatever this is, can't it wait until we land? Aaron's gaze found Gerald and held it. No, sir. It cannot wait. Because if we don't address injustice when it happens, we become complicit in it. He walked down the aisle toward economy, his uniform drawing every eye. Passengers craned their necks to see where he was going. Charlotte stood frozen, her face pale. Aaron reached row 27. Nadine looked up at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. Ms. Washington, Aaron said clearly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. On behalf of this airline and as captain of this aircraft, I apologize for the disgraceful way you were treated. You were removed from your rightful seat due to nothing more than prejudice and assumption. That ends now. I'm asking you to please return to your first-class seat. Comment number 1 if you think Captain Bennett did the right thing by grounding the flight. Hit that like button if you believe standing up for justice is more important than staying on schedule, and subscribe so you never miss incredible stories like this. Now here's the question, will Nadine accept his apology and return, or has the damage already been done? What would you do in her position? Let's find out what happens next. Nadine stared at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Jamal beside her smiled and nodded encouragingly. Eleanor from behind reached forward and squeezed Nadine's shoulder. Aaron extended his hand. Please. Let me correct this wrong. Slowly, Nadine stood. She gathered her belongings, her hands steadier now. As she stepped into the aisle, the passengers in economy began to clap. It started with Jamal, then Eleanor, then spread through the cabin. People Nadine did not know, would never meet again, applauding her simply because it was right. She walked beside Aaron back toward first class, her head high. When they entered the premium cabin, the atmosphere was completely different. Uncomfortable silence. Guilty faces looking away. Charlotte and Patricia stood rigid, their confidence evaporated. Aaron's voice carried through the section. This is MS. Nadine Washington, CEO of TechVista Solutions, one of the most successful technology companies in America. She deserves the same respect and dignity as every other passenger on this aircraft. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. Nadine reclaimed seat 2A. It felt different now. Not like a luxury, but like a battlefield she had won. Aaron turned to Charlotte. We'll be discussing this at length with management when we land. For now, you'll treat MS Washington with the professionalism she deserves. Am I clear? Yes, Captain, Charlotte whispered. Aaron looked at Nadine. Again, my sincere apologies. This should never have happened. Thank you, Captain Bennett, Nadine said, her voice strong despite the emotion behind it. What you just did took courage. Not many people have that. It's not courage. It's basic human decency. Aaron nodded and returned to the cockpit. Charlotte approached hesitantly. Ms. Washington, we. There was a misunderstanding. Nadine looked at her coldly. There was no misunderstanding. There was racism. Say it correctly. Patricia stepped forward, her voice shaking. We were just following our training about suspicious behavior. And what about my behavior was suspicious? Be specific. Nadine's voice could have cut glass. Was it my expensive suit? My designer bag? Or was it simply my skin color? Neither woman could answer. I want both your full names and employee numbers. My attorney will need them. Charlotte's face went white. Please, Ms. Washington. We could lose our jobs. You should have thought about that before you humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. A man from row 3 stood up. Harold Pierce, distinguished looking with gray temples. Ms. Washington, I owe you an apology too. I sat here and said nothing. I recognized your name, I know your company, and I still stayed silent. That was cowardly. Nadine nodded acknowledgement. But Gerald Foster muttered, loud enough to be heard, this whole circus. All over a seat. Nadine spun toward him. This is not about a seat. This is about whether I get treated like a human being or a criminal based solely on my appearance. Diane Campbell, Gerald's seatmate, chimed in. Well, if you had just cooperated from the start instead of making a scene, none of this would have happened. Harold Pierce turned on her. Mrs. Campbell, you're making this worse. The staff had no right to question her in the first place. I'm just saying, all this drama could have been avoided. Aaron's voice came from the cockpit doorway. He had heard the exchange. If anyone is uncomfortable with how I've handled this situation, you're welcome to deplane now and take a later flight. I'll arrange it personally. But if you remain on this aircraft, you will treat every passenger with respect. Final warning. Absolute silence. Aaron returned to the cockpit. The engines powered up again. This time, the plane rolled forward. Nadine opened her laptop, her hands still trembling but her mind racing. The presentation for New York could wait. She opened a new document and began typing notes. This was not over. Not even close. She was going to make sure it never happened to anyone else again. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Nadine tried to focus on work. But concentration remained impossible. Her mind kept replaying the humiliation, the anger, the moment Aaron had stood up for her when no one else would. An hour into the flight, Aaron emerged from the cockpit again. He stopped at Nadine's row, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. "May I sit for a moment?" "Please." Aaron settled in, his presence somehow calming. "How are you doing?" "Honestly?" Nadine considered lying, saying she was fine. But this man had just grounded a flight for her. He deserved honesty. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. And I'm tired of having to prove I belong everywhere I go." Aaron nodded slowly. "I understand that exhaustion. 10 years ago, I was the youngest captain this airline ever promoted. Black man, 29 years old, flying 700 passenger jets. The number of people who questioned my qualifications, my competence, even my right to be in the cockpit." He shook his head. "There was a passenger once who refused to fly because she didn't trust a black pilot. Said it right to my face. What did you do?" "I flew that plane perfectly. Smoothest landing of my career, actually. And you know what? She never apologized. Never even acknowledged she was wrong. She just got off and went about her day, probably still convinced she was right to doubt me." Nadine felt a kinship with this man. They had fought the same battles in different arenas. "When I started TechVista 12 years ago, I pitched to 102 investors. 101 said no. They didn't believe a black woman could run a tech company. They said it politely, in careful language, but that's what they meant." "Who was the one who said yes?" Nadine smiled for the first time since boarding. "Eleanor Price. The older woman sitting in 28C back in economy. She gave me $500,000 when no one else would even meet with me. She told me that betting against determined women, especially black women, was the worst investment mistake men kept making." Aaron glanced back toward economy. "She spoke up for you earlier, didn't she?" "Eleanor always speaks up. She taught me that success isn't just about proving doubters wrong. It's about living long enough to change the system that created the doubt in the first place." Aaron leaned forward, his expression serious. "I know TechVista is negotiating a major contract with this airline. AI automation systems, right? $500 million. Nadine raised an eyebrow. "You're well informed. It's a big deal for us. But I have to ask, after today, are you still willing to work with us?" Nadine had been asking herself the same question. "Honestly? I don't know. How can I partner with a company whose employees treat me like this?" "Because not everyone here is like Charlotte and Patricia," Aaron said quickly. "There are hundreds of employees, thousands, who want to do better. Who want the airline to be better. But change has to come from the top, and it has to come from leverage. You have that leverage now." An idea crystallized in Nadine's mind. "If I move forward with this contract, it won't be business as usual. I'll require conditions. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for every employee. A zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. Independent oversight. And consequences that actually matter." Aaron's eyes lit up. "That would be transformative. I'll support it however I can. In fact, I'll propose something similar to leadership. We need systemic change, not just punishing individuals after the fact." Nadine pulled out her phone, opened her email. She typed quickly, addressing her attorney Rita Thompson. "Rita, draft 2 documents. First, a conditional partnership agreement with the airline. Second, a class action lawsuit framework against discriminatory practices in commercial aviation. I want both ready when we land." She looked at Aaron. "I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for every black person who gets pulled aside at security, questioned about their ticket, treated like they don't belong. I'm using every resource I have." That's exactly what you should do. Meanwhile, in the back of economy, Jamal and Eleanor had struck up a conversation. Eleanor was telling him about her decades of investing, her commitment to supporting entrepreneurs the traditional financial world overlooked. I didn't invest in Nadine because I was certain she'd succeed, Eleanor explained. I invested because she deserved the chance. And you know what? She exceeded every expectation. That company is worth $2 billion now. My initial $500,000 is worth $80 million. Jamal's eyes widened. $80 million. Money matters, sure. But what matters more is that Nadine created hundreds of jobs, developed technology that helps millions of people, and proved that black women belong at the top of any industry they choose. That's the real return on investment. Back in first class, Charlotte and Patricia huddled in the galley, their voices low and panicked. We're going to get fired, Patricia whispered. She's a CEO. She has lawyers. We're done. Charlotte's confidence had completely crumbled. I was so sure. She just looked so out of place. I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone like her in first class. That's the problem, isn't it? Patricia said quietly. We judged her based on what we expected to see, not on who she actually was. Gerald Foster, sitting nearby, overheard their conversation. For the first time, doubt crept into his certainty. He pulled out his phone, began searching for Nadine Washington. When her Forbes cover appeared, when he read about her achievements, about TechVista's valuation, his stomach sank. He called his lawyer, keeping his voice low. If I was present during an incident of racial discrimination but didn't actually say anything discriminatory myself, can I be held liable? The lawyer's response made Gerald go pale. He ended the call, his hands shaking slightly. This was not just an inconvenience. This could destroy his reputation. Diane Campbell noticed his distress. What's wrong? That woman is incredibly powerful. And we just watched her get humiliated. Some of us even encouraged it. We didn't do anything wrong. We were just passengers. But Gerald was not so sure anymore. The flight continued, the miles disappearing beneath them. Nadine worked on her laptop, but her focus had shifted. Instead of reviewing her acquisition presentation, she was outlining her demands for the airline. Concrete changes. Measurable accountability. Real consequences. Aaron came by one more time before landing. I filed my incident report. I didn't sugarcoat anything. Charlotte and Patricia will face disciplinary action at minimum. But I also recommended you be contacted directly by our CEO to discuss how we can prevent this from ever happening again. I'll be waiting for that call, Nadine said. As New York appeared on the horizon, Nadine felt different than she had taken off from San Francisco. Still angry, yes. Still hurt. But also energized. Focused. Ready to turn her pain into power. The plane touched down smoothly at JFK. As they taxied to the gate, Nadine gathered her belongings. She caught Charlotte watching her nervously. Ms. Washington, Charlotte began, but Nadine held up a hand. Save it. We'll all have our day in court if necessary. Or in conference rooms if your airline chooses to do the right thing. Either way, this conversation is over. The jetway connected. Nadine stood, walked to the exit with dignity. Aaron appeared at the cockpit door. Ms. Washington, I wish you success in your meeting. And I meant what I said. Thank you for not letting this go. Thank you for being the one person who stood up when it mattered. Nadine stepped off the plane into the terminal and immediately saw the crowd. Reporters with cameras. Microphones thrust forward. Eleanor had called the press from the air, ensuring this story would not be buried. Ms. Washington. Can you comment on what happened on that flight? Nadine stopped. Looked directly into the cameras. Today I was removed from my first-class seat because flight attendants decided, based solely on my skin color, that I did not belong there. I was humiliated, treated like a criminal, and forced to economy. If not for the courage of Captain Aaron Bennett, who stopped the flight and demanded I be returned to my seat, I would have endured that injustice in silence like countless others before me. Are you planning legal action? I'm planning something more effective than legal action. I'm planning change. Real, systemic change. Stay tuned. She walked away, leaving the reporters scrambling for follow-ups. Her phone was already ringing. Her board of directors. Her investors. Everyone had seen the news. Sterling Hughes, her board chairman, was the first she answered. Nadine, we saw what happened. Are you all right? I'm fine. And I have a new direction for our airline contract negotiations. We're not just selling them technology. We're selling them accountability. I'm listening. As Nadine climbed into the car taking her to Manhattan, she allowed herself a small smile. The meeting she was heading to would determine her company's future. But what had just happened on that plane? That would determine something far bigger. That would determine whether the next black woman who bought a first-class ticket would be treated like she belonged there. The car merged onto the Van Wyck Expressway, heading toward Manhattan. Nadine's phone had not stopped ringing. She answered the most important calls, sent the rest to voicemail. The incident had already gone viral. #Justice for Nadine was trending on social media. Video taken by passengers was everywhere. But first, she had a meeting to dominate. TechVista's New York office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Midtown. When Nadine walked into the conference room, the entire board of directors stood and applauded. These were some of the most powerful people in technology, and they were applauding her. Sterling Hughes approached, his expression a mixture of pride and anger. We all saw the news. What they did to you was inexcusable. It was predictable, Nadine corrected. Black people face this treatment every single day. The difference is I have resources and a platform to fight back. Most don't. She took her seat at the head of the massive conference table, opened her laptop, and pulled up not the acquisition presentation, but something else entirely. Before we discuss the merger, we need to talk about the airline contract. I'm proposing we use our leverage to force systemic change. For the next hour, Nadine laid out her vision. The airline would not just buy their AI technology. They would commit to comprehensive anti-discrimination training, develop accountability measures, create an independent review board for passenger complaints, and fund a $10 million justice initiative. Board member Victoria Chen raised her hand. Those are significant demands. They might walk away from the deal entirely. Then we find another airline, Nadine said simply. I will not build technology for a company that treats people like I was treated today. Our values have to mean something. The board voted. Unanimous support. Sterling made the call to the airline's CEO, David Preston, right there in the meeting. David, you've seen the news. Nadine is here with us. Before we continue our contract discussions, she has some non-negotiable conditions. Across the city, in the airline's executive offices, chaos reigned. David Preston watched his company's stock price drop in real time. 3% loss in 2 hours. The PR disaster was spreading exponentially. His chief communications officer, Sarah Coleman, stood before his desk with a tablet showing the latest social media metrics. Sir, this is beyond anything we can spin. The video of Captain Bennett grounding the flight is everywhere. The quotes from Ms. Washington are devastating. We're being called racist, discriminatory, and out of touch. What do we do? David asked. Apologize. Fire the employees involved. And pray Ms. Washington doesn't sue us into oblivion. David's assistant interrupted. Sir, Sterling Hughes from TechVista is on the phone. He says it's urgent. David picked up, putting it on speaker. Sterling, I want to start by apologizing for what happened to Ms. Washington. It was completely unacceptable, and we're taking immediate action. Nadine's voice came through, clear and firm. Mr. Preston, apologies are appreciated but insufficient. If you want this partnership to continue, if you want to avoid a class action lawsuit that will make headlines for years, you will agree to my terms. She outlined her demands. Mandatory training. Zero-tolerance policies. Independent oversight. A $10 million fund for victims of discrimination in aviation. David's chief counsel, sitting beside him, shook his head frantically, mouthing no. Too much exposure. Too much liability. But David Preston had been in business for 30 years. He knew when he had no leverage. Ms. Washington, those are extensive requirements. Can we discuss them in person? You have 24 hours to provide a written commitment. After that, I go public with my lawsuit and cancel our contract. Your choice. The call ended. David looked at his team. She's going to destroy us if we don't comply. She might destroy us if we do, the lawyer countered. Admitting fault, committing to these changes, it's essentially confessing to systematic discrimination. Sarah, the communications officer, disagreed. She's going to prove systematic discrimination with or without our admission. At least this way, we control the narrative. We become the company that chose to change rather than the company that got sued into change. David made his decision. Set up a meeting with Ms. Washington. Today if possible. We're going to give her what she wants. Back at the Plaza Hotel, where Nadine had checked in after her board meeting, she received the call. David Preston wanted to meet within hours. She agreed, setting the location as neutral ground, a private room at the hotel. When David arrived with his lawyer and communications chief, Nadine was already seated with Rita Thompson and 2 other attorneys from the firm she kept on retainer. David began with an apology. Ms. Washington, what happened to you was reprehensible. Charlotte Evans and Patricia Reynolds have already been terminated. We're reviewing our entire training program. Terminating 2 employees doesn't fix the system that allowed them to behave that way, Nadine responded. I want commitments in writing. Binding commitments with financial penalties if you fail to meet them. The negotiation lasted 3 hours. Nadine did not yield on a single point. David tried to soften some requirements, reduce the financial commitment, but she refused every compromise. Finally, exhausted and recognizing he had no alternative, David agreed. We'll draft the documents tonight. You'll have them tomorrow morning for review. One more thing, Nadine added. Captain Aaron Bennett. The man who grounded that flight to defend me. I want him promoted to Director of Diversity and Inclusion Training. Full executive salary, full authority to implement changes throughout the company. David blinked. That's a very specific request. Captain Bennett proved he has the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. That's exactly who should lead this initiative. Make it happen. David nodded slowly. I'll offer him the position. Don't offer. Give it to him. He earned it. After David left, Rita turned to Nadine with admiration. You just leveraged one incident into company-wide reform. That's remarkable. This isn't about revenge, Nadine said quietly. It's about making sure the next black woman who sits in first class doesn't have to fight the same battle I did. Over the following week, the dominoes fell rapidly. The airline announced sweeping changes. David Preston held a press conference with Nadine at his side, acknowledging the company's failures and committing to transformation. Charlotte Evans and Patricia Reynolds appeared on morning television, tearful and apologetic. Charlotte spoke haltingly. I thought I was doing my job. I realize now that my assumptions, my biases, caused real harm. I'm deeply sorry. I'm using this as an opportunity to learn and change. Patricia added, I followed along because I didn't have the courage to question authority. Silence makes you complicit. I should have spoken up. Both women began working with civil rights organizations, using their experience as a cautionary tale in diversity training programs. Gerald Foster faced his own reckoning. His company lost several major clients who did not want to be associated with someone present during a discrimination incident. He was forced to resign from his board positions. In a video statement, he acknowledged his failure. I watched injustice happen and did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, wasn't my problem. I was wrong. Silence is participation. Meanwhile, Eleanor Price became a media darling. At 78, she gave interview after interview about the importance of supporting entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. I've made 42 investments in companies led by women of color. 39 of them have been profitable. The other 3 are still growing. Bias isn't just morally wrong. It's financially stupid. Jamal Hughes received an unexpected call from Nadine herself. I hear you're a software engineer. How would you like to work on something that matters? I'm building an AI system that can detect discriminatory patterns in customer service interactions. I need someone who understands both the technology and the lived experience. Jamal accepted immediately. Within months, his work would help develop technology that airlines, hotels, and retail companies would use to identify and address bias in their operations. The airline stock price, after initially dropping, began to recover as positive press about their transformation efforts spread. Customer satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvement, particularly among Black passengers who reported feeling safer and more respected. 6 months after the incident, the airline released their progress report. Discrimination complaints had decreased by 92%. Employee satisfaction was up. And contrary to the fears of some executives, profitability had actually increased. Treating customers with respect turned out to be good for business. Nadine watched all of this unfold with satisfaction, but she knew the work was not finished. She had turned her personal pain into corporate policy. Now she needed to turn it into lasting change. 3 months after the incident, Nadine stood at a podium at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. The room was packed with activists, attorneys, and everyday people who had faced similar discrimination. She was announcing the official launch of the TechVista Justice Fund. Today, we're committing $20 million to provide legal representation and support for victims of racial discrimination in travel and transportation, Nadine declared. No one should have to choose between fighting injustice and affording a lawyer. No one should have to stay silent because they don't have resources. The audience erupted in applause. Rita Thompson stood beside her, smiling. In the past weeks, they had been contacted by hundreds of people with stories eerily similar to Nadine's. Removed from flights. Questioned at hotels. Followed in stores. The pattern was undeniable and overwhelming. Erin Bennett, now officially the airline's Director of Diversity and Inclusion, spoke next. When I grounded that flight, I knew there would be consequences. What I didn't expect was the opportunity to create real change from the inside. In the past 90 days, we've trained every single one of our 40,000 employees. We've revised policies, created accountability structures, and most importantly, we've listened to the people we've harmed. He gestured to a screen showing statistics. We're not perfect yet. But discrimination complaints are down. Passenger satisfaction is up across all demographic groups. And we're seeing other airlines adopt similar programs. Change is spreading. A reporter asked the question everyone was thinking. Ms. Washington, you could have taken a settlement, kept quiet, and moved on. Why fight this publicly? Nadine leaned into the microphone. Because settlements protect companies, not people. Silence enables systems to continue harming others. I had the resources and platform to fight. How could I not use them? Every black person in America has a story like mine. Most never get justice. I had the chance to change that equation. I took it. The press conference concluded, but the real work continued. The Justice Fund began taking cases. A black family removed from a cruise ship for suspicious behavior, which turned out to be letting their children play in the pool. A Latina businesswoman questioned about whether her luxury car was really hers at a hotel valet. A black man detained by mall security for matching the description of a suspect who looked nothing like him. Each case was fought vigorously. Some resulted in settlements with policy changes. Others went to trial and set legal precedents. The message was clear: discrimination had consequences. Meanwhile, TechVista's AI detection system, led by Jamal, was being tested by major corporations. The software analyzed customer service interactions for patterns that suggested racial bias. Hotels discovered their front desk staff disproportionately questioned black guests about payment methods. Rental car companies found their employees more frequently demanded additional documentation from Hispanic customers. Retailers learned their security followed black shoppers at rates far exceeding actual theft incidents. Armed with data, these companies could no longer deny their problems. Many chose to address them. Those who didn't found themselves facing lawsuits backed by the Justice Fund's resources. Nadine's company thrived. The airline contract, now signed with all her conditions included, generated massive revenue. But more than that, it generated respect. Other companies sought partnerships with TechVista specifically because of Nadine's stance on justice. Her values became her brand's greatest asset. Eleanor Price, ever the investor, pointed this out during one of their regular lunches. You've proven that doing the right thing can also be the profitable thing. That's the most powerful argument for change. Profitability shouldn't be the reason we treat people fairly, Nadine countered. No, but it's the reason corporations listen. You're speaking their language while changing their values. That's brilliant. A year after the incident, Harvard Business School invited Nadine to speak. The auditorium was filled with students, most of them young people of color who saw Nadine as proof that they too could succeed despite the obstacles. She told them her story. Not just the airplane incident, but her entire journey. The rejection. The doubt. The moments she wanted to quit. And the decision to keep pushing forward. A young black woman raised her hand during Q&A. How did you handle the fear? Fear of losing the contract, fear of retaliation, fear that speaking up would cost you everything. Nadine paused, considering her answer carefully. I was terrified. But I asked myself what I would tell my younger self, the girl who faced rejection 102 times before getting her first investment. I would tell her that fear is information, not instruction. Feel it, acknowledge it, then do what's right anyway. A white male student asked, what can those of us with privilege do? We're not the targets of this discrimination. Be Aaron Bennett, Nadine said immediately. Use your position to protect those who don't have the same protections. Speak up when you see injustice, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Your silence maintains the status quo. Your voice can change it. After her speech, Aaron appeared on stage, surprising her. He carried a plaque. Today, the Airline Pilots Association is honoring Nadine Washington with the Social Justice Achievement Award. Ms. Washington, you transformed an industry's approach to equity. On behalf of every pilot who's been questioned about their qualifications because of their skin color, thank you. Nadine accepted the award, but her mind was already on what came next. Awards were nice. Real change was better. She met with Charlotte Evans and Patricia Reynolds, who had requested the meeting. Both women had spent the year in intensive diversity training, working with civil rights organizations, confronting their own biases. Charlotte spoke first, her voice thick with emotion. Ms. Washington, I can never undo what I did to you. But I wanted you to know that I've devoted this year to understanding why I did it. I grew up in an environment where certain assumptions about black people were so normalized I didn't even recognize them as prejudice. That's not an excuse. It's an explanation. And it's something I'm working every day to unlearn. Patricia added, I followed Charlotte's lead because I was conflict-averse. I saw you being treated unfairly and said nothing. That cowardice enabled discrimination. I'm teaching young flight attendants now, using my experience as a warning about the harm that silence causes. Nadine listened without interruption. When they finished, she spoke carefully. I appreciate your willingness to change. Real accountability means not just apologizing but ensuring it never happens again. If you're genuinely committed to that, then your mistakes can become lessons for others. We are committed, Charlotte said. Completely. Then make sure every person you train understands that assumptions based on appearance destroy dignity. Teach them what you learned the hard way. Both women nodded, tears in their eyes. They would never be friends with Nadine. But perhaps they could be allies in preventing others from repeating their mistakes. Gerald Foster had his own journey. After resigning from his company, he took a position teaching business ethics at a community college. His first lecture addressed his failure on that airplane. I watched discrimination happen and told myself it wasn't my responsibility. I was wrong. In business, in life, silence is a choice. And it's a choice with consequences. He donated a significant portion of his remaining wealth to the Justice Fund. It would not erase his inaction, but it was something. David Preston, the airline's CEO, became an unexpected advocate for corporate accountability. At industry conferences, he spoke openly about his company's failures and the reforms they had implemented. We thought we were above this problem. We weren't. Every company has bias in its systems. The question is whether you're brave enough to acknowledge it and committed enough to fix it. Other airlines began following suit. Not because they wanted to, but because passengers demanded it and Nadine's model proved it was possible. Within 2 years, the entire industry had adopted similar training and accountability measures. Nadine watched this ripple effect with deep satisfaction. One moment of injustice, transformed through determination and resources into systemic change. It was not perfect. Discrimination had not been eliminated. But the conversation had changed. The expectations had changed. And most importantly, the consequences had changed. People who discriminated now faced real repercussions. Companies that enabled discrimination faced legal and financial costs. And victims of discrimination had a champion with the resources to fight back. That was progress. 2 years after the incident, Nadine received an invitation that brought tears to her eyes. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture wanted to include her story in their civil rights exhibition. They were creating a display about modern discrimination and resistance. She stood in the museum, looking at the exhibit they had created. Her boarding pass from that flight, preserved behind glass. Photos of Aaron grounding the plane. Newspaper headlines about the reforms that followed. And a video screen playing her press conference statements on loop. Future generations will see this, the curator explained. They'll understand that civil rights battles didn't end in the 60s. They continue every day, in different forms, fought by people like you. Nadine thought about her younger self, the scared girl from Alabama who had been told repeatedly she did not belong in tech, in business, in leadership. That girl had grown into a woman who changed an entire industry's approach to equality. But she was not done. TechVista launched a new initiative, partnerships with historically black colleges and universities to create AI ethics and bias detection programs. Jamal led the effort, recruiting students who understood both the technology and the human cost of algorithmic discrimination. These students are building the next generation of tools that will make bias visible and measurable, Jamal explained at the program launch. They're ensuring that as AI becomes more prevalent, it doesn't amplify existing prejudices. Eleanor Price, now 80, continued investing in women of color entrepreneurs. Her portfolio had grown to 60 companies, collectively valued at over $5 billion and employing thousands of people. She had become the leading voice for inclusive venture capital. "People told me I was taking foolish risks," Eleanor said in an interview. "They said these founders were unproven, that diversity was less important than returns. I've outperformed 90% of traditional VC firms. Turns out betting on talented people regardless of their skin color or gender is not just ethical. It's profitable." Erin Bennett's diversity training program became the gold standard in aviation. Other industries adapted his model. Hotels, cruise lines, rental car companies, and even retail chains implemented similar approaches. Erin wrote a book, Grounding Bias: How One Decision Changed an Industry. It became required reading in business schools. Charlotte and Patricia, meanwhile, had become unlikely advocates. They traveled to companies, sharing their story as a cautionary tale. Charlotte would stand before rooms full of employees and say, "I was the villain in a national news story. I destroyed someone's dignity because of my unchecked assumptions. Learn from my mistake. Question your biases before they hurt someone." Their message resonated precisely because they were not heroes. They were people who had failed, faced consequences, and chosen to change. David Preston retired from the airline, but his final act as CEO was establishing an endowment for discrimination prevention research. "I want my legacy to be not just running a successful airline, but running an airline that treated every passenger with equal dignity. We didn't start there. But we got there. That matters." The Justice Fund had grown beyond anything Nadine initially imagined. With $20 million in initial funding and additional donations from corporations seeking to demonstrate commitment to equity, the fund now supported legal representation for discrimination victims across multiple industries. Rita Thompson, leading the fund's legal team, tracked their impact. "We've won or settled 342 cases in 2 years. More importantly, we've forced policy changes at 67 major companies. Every victory creates precedent that protects others." But Nadine's proudest moment came when she returned to her hometown in Alabama. The small rural town where she had grown up, where she had been one of only 3 black students in her high school, where guidance counselors had told her to set realistic career goals. She stood in that same high school gymnasium, now renovated and renamed the Nadine Washington STEM Center, speaking to students who looked like her younger self. "I was told I didn't belong in technology. I was told companies like TechVista couldn't be built by someone like me. I was told to accept discrimination as an inevitable part of life." She paused, looking at the young faces before her. "I refused to accept any of it. And that refusal changed not just my life, but the lives of thousands of others." A young black girl, maybe 13, raised her hand. "Ms. Washington, do you ever get tired? Fighting all the time?" Nadine smiled softly. "Every single day. But you know what gives me energy? Knowing that because I fought, maybe you won't have to fight the same battles. Maybe your path will be a little easier. Maybe when you sit in first class someday, no one will question whether you belong there. That's what makes the exhaustion worthwhile." Her former teacher, Mrs. Martinez, now retired, attended the event. Afterward, she pulled Nadine aside. "I always knew you were special. But you exceeded even my wildest hopes. You told me I belonged in any room I chose to enter," Nadine reminded her. "You were the first person who made me believe that. I never forgot." The school announced a scholarship fund in Nadine's name, providing full college funding for black students pursuing STEM degrees. Nadine contributed the first $1 million personally. As she left her hometown, driving past familiar streets transformed by time, Nadine reflected on her journey. From that small town to running $1 billion company. From being removed from a first-class seat to changing how an entire industry operated. She thought about Aaron, who had risked his career to do what was right. Eleanor, who had believed when no one else would. Jamal, who had turned his own experiences of discrimination into tools to combat it. Even Charlotte and Patricia, who had harmed her but then chosen to be part of the solution. Change was possible. Not easy. Not quick. But possible. Her phone rang. It was Sterling Hughes. Nadine, we just closed the acquisition. TechVista is now a $3 billion company. The Justice Fund work, the airline reforms, the HBCU partnerships, all of it strengthened our brand and attracted investors who value our mission. You built something that's both profitable and purposeful. Nadine thanked him and ended the call. She pulled over at a rest stop, looking out at the landscape. Somewhere on a plane overhead, people were traveling. Some in first class, some in economy. And because of what had happened 2 years ago, because of the choice she made to fight rather than accept, those passengers were more likely to be treated with dignity regardless of their skin color. That was the real return on investment. Not the billions in company valuation. Not the awards and recognition. But the knowledge that the next black woman who boarded a plane would have slightly better odds of being treated like she belonged there. Nadine got back in her car and continued driving toward the airport. She had another flight to catch. First class, naturally. And this time, she knew exactly how the story would unfold. She would be treated with respect. Not because she was a CEO. Not because she was famous. But because the systems had changed. Because enough people had decided discrimination was unacceptable. Because silence was no longer the default response to injustice. As her plane took off that evening, Nadine looked out the window at the world below. So much had changed. So much still needed to change. But progress was real, visible, measurable. She opened her laptop and began drafting her next initiative. The fight was not over. It would never truly be over. But every victory made the next one more possible. And that was enough to keep going. 5 years after the incident, Nadine Washington stood in a place she never imagined, the grand opening ceremony of Washington Bennett International Terminal at San Francisco Airport. The terminal, named jointly for her and Aaron, represented the airport's commitment to equity and inclusion in aviation. The terminal's design incorporated art celebrating black excellence in aviation, from Bessie Coleman to modern pilots and executives. Digital displays rotated through stories of breaking barriers and fighting discrimination. And at the entrance stood a bronze statue, Nadine seated in an airplane seat, head held high, with the inscription, "She refused to move. She moved the world." Nadine stood before the crowd of dignitaries, journalists, and ordinary travelers. Aaron stood beside her, no longer in a pilot's uniform but in the suit of a corporate vice president. His diversity initiatives had been so successful that he now oversaw human resources for the entire airline. 5 years ago, I was removed from a first-class seat on a flight that should have been routine, Nadine began, her voice carrying through the terminal. That moment of injustice became a catalyst for change that rippled far beyond one airplane, one airline, one industry. She gestured to the people standing with her. Eleanor Price, now 83, still sharp and still investing in entrepreneurs the world overlooked. Jamal Hughes, whose AI bias detection systems were now used by Fortune 500 companies worldwide. Rita Thompson, whose Justice Fund had grown to provide legal support in 8 countries. Even Charlotte Evans and Patricia Reynolds, who now ran one of the nation's most respected diversity consulting firms, helping companies avoid the mistakes they had made. Change doesn't happen alone, Nadine continued. It happens when people choose courage over comfort. When Captain Bennett grounded that flight, he risked his career. When Eleanor believed in me decades ago, she risked her capital. When Jamal turned his pain into purpose, he risked being vulnerable. When Charlotte and Patricia faced their failures publicly, they risked their reputations. She paused, looking directly into the cameras broadcasting this moment worldwide. Every one of you watching this has that choice. When you see injustice, you can stay silent and safe, or you can speak up and potentially change someone's world. I'm asking you to choose courage. The crowd applauded, but Nadine was not finished. This terminal is beautiful, and I'm honored by it. But it's not the end point. It's a reminder. A reminder that progress requires constant vigilance. That systems default to inequality unless we actively push them toward justice. That today's victory must fuel tomorrow's fight. She shared statistics that demonstrated real change. Discrimination complaints in aviation had decreased by 74% industry-wide. Black executives in transportation companies had increased by 41%. The Justice Fund had provided legal representation in over 1,000 cases, winning 87% of them and forcing policy changes at 132 major corporations. But, Nadine cautioned, we cannot declare victory and stop fighting. Last month, a black teenager was removed from a bus for looking suspicious. 2 weeks ago, a Latina executive was questioned about her credentials at a hotel. Yesterday, an Asian American family was profiled at airport security. The work continues. Aaron took the microphone. When I stopped that flight 5 years ago, I was following a simple principle: people matter more than schedules. Dignity matters more than convenience. Justice matters more than avoiding discomfort. That principle should guide every decision in every industry. He announced new initiatives. Mandatory bias training was now required for pilot certification, not just at one airline but industry-wide. Flight attendant programs included extensive modules on recognizing and combating discrimination. And airports were implementing passenger advocate programs, independent representatives who could intervene when travelers faced unfair treatment. Eleanor spoke briefly but powerfully. I'm an old woman now. I've lived through segregation, civil rights battles, and the slow march toward equality. What Nadine did, what Aaron did, what all of you can do, is refuse to accept that the march is over. Every generation must fight its own battles against injustice. This is yours. Win it. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the terminal centerpiece, a wall where travelers could share their own stories of discrimination and resistance. Within hours, hundreds of stories appeared, creating a living archive of both the problem and the ongoing fight against it. Later that evening, Nadine sat with her core team in a restaurant overlooking the bay. They toasted their achievements but also discussed future challenges. We've changed aviation, Jamal said. But housing discrimination is still rampant. Employment discrimination. Healthcare disparities. We've won one battle. So we fight the next one, Rita replied. The Justice Fund is expanding into employment law next quarter. We're not stopping. Nadine smiled at her team, this collection of people who had turned personal pain into systematic change. Here's what I've learned. Individual acts of discrimination are symptoms. The disease is the acceptance of those acts as inevitable. We didn't just punish people who discriminated. We changed the culture that enabled discrimination. That's the model we take into every fight. Aaron raised his glass. To fighting the next battle. And the one after that. And the one after that. They drank to it. Weeks later, Nadine returned to Harvard Business School, this time not as a speaker but to teach a semester-long course, From Injustice to Impact, Using Business Leverage for Social Change. The syllabus included case studies of how corporations could be pressured into equity, how legal frameworks supported discrimination victims, and how technology could both perpetuate and combat bias. Her students were diverse, engaged, and hungry to make a difference. Many of them had their own stories of discrimination. Together, they developed frameworks that other businesses adopted. One student, a young black woman named Maya, stayed after class one day. Professor Washington, I want to do what you did. Build a company, use it to create change. But I'm scared. What if I fail? Nadine remembered asking herself the same question countless times. Failure is likely. I failed more times than I succeeded. But every failure taught me something. And the successes, when they came, mattered because I had failed first. Don't be afraid of failure. Be afraid of not trying. Maya nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. Nadine saw her younger self in that expression. The semester ended, but Nadine's work did not. TechVista continued innovating, the Justice Fund continued fighting, and the ripples from that day on the airplane continued spreading. Airlines that had resisted change found themselves losing customers to competitors who embraced equity. Hotels that ignored discrimination complaints faced boycotts and legal action. Companies across industries realized that treating people fairly was not just ethical but economically essential. On the 5th anniversary of the incident, Nadine flew first class from San Francisco to New York. The same route. The same airline. But everything else was different. The flight attendant who greeted her was a young black woman named Kenya. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Washington. It's an honor to serve you." Nadine smiled. "The honor is mine. How long have you been flying?" 6 months. "I almost didn't pursue this career because I'd heard stories about discrimination. But then I learned about what you did, what Captain Bennett did, and I realized things were changing. I decided to be part of that change." Tears pricked Nadine's eyes. "That's why we did it. So people like you would feel safe pursuing your dreams." As the plane took off, Nadine looked around first class. Black passengers, white passengers, Asian passengers, Latino passengers. All treated with equal respect and dignity. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was better. She thought about the statue at the airport. She refused to move. She moved the world. It was not quite accurate. She had not moved the world alone. Aaron had helped. Eleanor had helped. Jamal, Rita, even Charlotte and Patricia in their own way. Thousands of people had contributed to this change. But she had refused to accept injustice as inevitable. And that refusal had been the spark that lit a fire. The plane climbed toward cruising altitude. Below, the country spread out in all its complicated beauty. So much progress made. So much still needed. Nadine opened her laptop and began writing. Not a business plan this time, but a book. Her story, from Alabama to boardrooms to that airplane and beyond. She would tell it all, the failures and triumphs, the fear and courage, the defeats and victories. Because the next generation needed to know that change was possible. Difficult, exhausting, sometimes dangerous, but possible. The flight attendant, Kenya, stopped by with a drink. "Can I ask you something, Ms. Washington?" "Of course." "Was it worth it? All the fighting, the lawsuits, the attacks from people who said you were overreacting. Was it worth the cost?" Nadine looked at this young woman who felt safe enough to pursue her dreams because others had fought for that safety. She thought about every victim of discrimination who now had legal support. Every employee who received training on combating bias. Every policy that had been rewritten to protect rather than harm. "Yes," she said simply. "It was worth every single moment." Kenya smiled and moved on to serve other passengers. Nadine returned to her writing, the words flowing easily now. Hours later, the plane descended into New York. The same city where this journey had reached its turning point 5 years ago. Nadine gathered her belongings, preparing to deplane. As she walked through the terminal, she passed the Washington Bennett terminal plaque. She paused, reading the inscription one more time. She refused to move. She moved the world. Not alone, she thought. Never alone. But she had started it. And sometimes, starting was the hardest and most important part. Nadine walked into the New York evening, ready for whatever came next. The fight for justice never ended. But tonight, she could rest knowing she had moved the needle. She had made the world measurably better. And tomorrow, she would wake up and move it a little bit more. What's your story of witnessing or experiencing discrimination? Drop a comment below and share it. If this story inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe so you never miss powerful narratives of courage and change. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Together, we can continue moving the world toward justice. Thank you for watching, and may you always have the courage to refuse to move when justice demands you stand firm. Until next time, keep fighting for what's right. This story teaches us that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. When Nadine was wrongfully removed from her seat, most passengers stayed silent, prioritizing their convenience over her dignity. Captain Aaron Bennett showed us that true leadership means using your position to protect those who cannot protect themselves, even when it disrupts the status quo. His decision to ground the flight demonstrated that schedules matter less than human dignity. The transformation of Charlotte and Patricia proves that people can change when forced to confront their biases. Their journey from perpetrators to advocates shows that accountability combined with education creates real growth. Meanwhile, Eleanor Price exemplified how allies with privilege should invest in those the system overlooks, not just with words but with tangible resources and unwavering support. Nadine's response teaches perhaps the most crucial lesson: don't just seek personal justice, demand systemic change. She leveraged her position not for revenge but for reform, ensuring her experience would prevent future discrimination. Her strategy of using business leverage to force corporate accountability created ripple effects across entire industries. Finally, this story reminds us that progress requires constant vigilance. Discrimination evolves, taking new forms in each generation. The fight for equality is not a destination but an ongoing commitment. Each of us must choose daily whether we will be bystanders who enable injustice or activists who challenge it, knowing that our smallest actions can spark monumental change. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and regretted staying silent? Or did you find the courage to speak up like Captain Bennett? Share your story in the comments below. If you believe that standing up for justice matters more than convenience, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that inspire courage and demand accountability. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that one person's refusal to accept injustice can truly move the world. What would you have done in Nadine's position? Would you have accepted the humiliation quietly, or fought back knowing it might cost you everything? Drop a comment with your honest answer. And here's a challenge. This week, when you see unfairness happening to someone else, will you be the person who speaks up? Thank you for watching this powerful story of courage, transformation, and the relentless pursuit of justice. May you always have the strength to refuse to move when dignity demands you stand firm. Remember, change starts with people like you who believe a better world is possible and are willing to fight for it. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, keep demanding better from the systems around you, and keep believing that your voice matters. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve.